What's up, guys? Welcome to the second part in the SQL Injection tutorial. And in this part I'm going to illustrate another example of a common SQL vulnerability. So in this tutorial I have a login page that looks something like this. And I have an existing user. If I look in my database, I can see that I have this user called this with this password. And of course, you shouldn't be saving your password in plain text like this. It's just for simplicity's sake. And I will be covering how to store passwords safely in another tutorial. But for now, let's keep it like this. And so if I enter those credentials, I should be logged in. Yep. And I don't get an error message, as you see. And now I'm able to go to my index page, and it's the same page as before where you can post data to the database. And I have also created this logout button. If I click this, I'm redirected to the login page. So let's have a look at the code and why this page is vulnerable to SQL injections. First off, let's start in the index page. I'm using session variables to store a username, and I have to start the session right here. And if that session, I call it user. If that session user is bigger than 0, which it is because I saved the username in there, it's considered logged in. So I echo out the username right there. Otherwise, I redirect to the login page. And if you're downloading this code, you may have to modify this so it suits your URL for your login page. And also the same thing with posting data and saving data to the database as before. And I also have this very simple form that has a hidden input, and it's for logging out. So if they click the button, they post data, I fetch it here, and I set the session user to an empty string, which will mean that this if statement right here will not pass, and they will be redirected. So let's have a look at the login page then. It's pretty basic. It has a simple form with a username and password, which is fetched in the callback right here. I start the session first off, and if they're already logged in, I output the username. And if the post variable of username and password is set, which they are if you have a post back from the form, I called a method called login, which is exists in my backend file. And if that function returns true, the session variable user is equal to the posted username. So that's how I store the username in the session variable user. So let's have a look at this login function in my backend file. And this is where it gets interesting, because as you can see, my username and password ends up here. And it should come to no news to you that if you create SQL statements like this, you should MySQLi real escape them as before. And you have to real escape both of them, of course. All inputted data should be real escaped. So yeah, and that's how you solve this vulnerability as well. Bit of a spoiler, I guess. But anyway, so what I'm going to do this time is I'm not going to inject SQL code into the database this time, but I'm going to use it like in a different way to get access to the page without having a proper login. So for example, if we try to log in as something that is not a valid user, I will get an error message that looks like this. This is not a valid login. So as you can see, it's working. And what I want to do is I want to make this SQL statement right here to always be true. So I'm going to take the username out, and I'm going to take the password out as well. So what I want to do is I want to insert something that looks like this. First off, I want to terminate this query right here. And then I want to say if username is equal to empty string or 1 is equal to 1, which is always going to be true. But in this case, this is not a multi-query, so I cannot do this. If it was a multi-query, I could do it like this, and it'll work out. So you can try this also, but it won't work in this case. So instead, because I have this trailing terminator right here, so what I want to do is call if or an empty string is equal to an empty string, which is always true, of course. So, and I want to do the exact same thing for the password variable, so they're basically the same. So this is the part where I want to copy. And take a moment to grasp how this works, because they're logically always true. So it's just going to return the first user in the database. So let's try it out. And this I just pasted into the username and I pasted into the password as well. I try to log in. And as you can see, I didn't get the error message, so I'm logged in. Let's try to go to the index page, and yeah, welcome, blah blah blah. And the reason for this username is not because this data is not from the database. This user name is set from the post variable. So if, for example, I instead let's have a look at the code. So for example, in my it's in the login file right here. I set the session user the posted username because I have easily access to it here. But this data could also be, I could also set the username from the database variable here. For example, from this variable username. And then it would say then the username would be the first row in the database because this could contain a lot of users, and it would just pick the first one. So that's and how do you protect yourself against it? It's the same procedure as with the previous tutorial. It's just a different kind of a different context and usage of it. So let's try out to make sure that the secure version also works. So let's log out, and I'm redirected. I try to input some gibberish. I'm not logged in. Let's try and input the harmful code. And as you can see, I'm not logged in. So I can't go to I shouldn't be able to go to the index page. No, I'm redirected. So let's make sure that the proper login also works. And it does. I don't get an error message. Let's go to the index page and I'm logged in. So that's a different way of using logically altering the SQL statements, and this is quite common if you don't really escape your input. So thank you guys for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next tutorial. Bye.